Greetings, Saints. As we move into this weekend, it's Pentecost Sunday, which traditionally in the larger church community is called Wit Sunday, W-H-I-T Sunday. It's a name that comes from the word white. So it emerged in the early church because Pentecost was one of the primary days in church history, all the way from the beginning, for baptisms. So those that were newly baptized wore white garments as a symbol of their new life and purity in Christ, which is a tradition that actually has been carried out, if you think about it, in many Christian circles throughout the ages. The white robes marked their entrance into the community of faith and their fresh beginnings as followers of Jesus. Over time, the celebration of Pentecost became closely associated with that image of newness, cleansing, and spiritual birth. So Wit Sunday captures the essence of Pentecost, where we celebrate God's Spirit breathing new life into the church and clothing us with the garments of salvation, purity, grace, and the white, which speaks of the light, the brightness, the glory that is part of the baptismal experience. Now, the lectionary reading that I want to look at is the Genesis 11, 1-9 on the story of the Tower of Babel, because Pentecost is the reversal of Babel, so that when we revisit the ancient story of Babel, we tend to imagine ambitious people building a great tower, aiming to reach heaven and make a lasting name for themselves, which is what the text says. However, beneath that familiar surface of the story is something far deeper, more personal. It speaks directly to the heart of our lives and our communities right now in the current culture. Babel wasn't merely about a single spoken language. There were actually two types of language at work in Babel. There was a tower language and a city language. So the city language was the language of everyday life, the ordinary conversations that build relationships and communities. And the tower language that reached to heaven was the deeper language of worship, the common confession that shaped their beliefs and identity. So there was a liturgical language and there was a common language. They had one set of words to manage their daily living, and the text said one lip of shared liturgical confession to unify their worship and values. Their city was built on everyday words designed to bring people together practically and socially. But their tower, that great ziggurat, like the ladder that Jacob sees reaching to heaven, that's a ziggurat, reaches toward heaven, was built from their shared religious confession and their unified religious ambition. They envisioned it as a sacred bridge, a gate, a gateway connecting earth to heaven. That's what Babel means. It's a gate, hoping it might grant them divine favor and eternal significance. It wasn't just about human pride. It was an attempt to overcome the fear of being scattered, isolated, and ultimately forgotten. And it was rebellion against a God who wants to be their God, but they didn't want him as God. Their aim was security, listen carefully, through sameness, and immortality through a great name. They wanted everything to be the same, and they wanted to have a great name that would be immortal. However, in their pursuit of security, they lost sight of something very crucial. Their unity became rigid uniformity. They sought absolute sameness, not just culturally, but spiritually. They became intolerant of difference. They determined to control their fear by eliminating diversity. When God stepped in, scattering their languages, it wasn't simply judgment. It was kindness. It was a loving act to protect humanity from the illusion that sameness could bring true security. God's disruption was grace, opening humanity to the possibility of authentic relationships built on mutual respect, humility, and genuine understanding. Then comes Pentecost, God's beautiful reversal of Babel. Here, God didn't remove the differences. He embraced and celebrated them. At Pentecost, many languages were heard clearly. Each person, however, understood God's truth in their own native tongue. Unity happened not through forcing everyone into a single confession, into a single shared worship. A liturgical language was formed that welcomed all cultures, all stories, all people. Having just gotten back from Brazil, hearing the saints there worship in Portuguese. I didn't know a word they said, but I knew the spirit behind it, and I just entered in and enjoyed the presence of Jesus in their language. Pentecost informs us that our unity doesn't depend on having identical cultures, thoughts, or ways of expression. Instead, it comes from a deeper shared language, the language of worship, the language of love, the language of grace revealed in Jesus. Today, we live between these two stories, Babel's fearful pursuit of uniformity and Pentecost's joyful celebration of unity within diversity. Every day, we speak practical words, ordinary conversations that build our relationships and our communities. However, each time we gather for worship, we share another language, the language of liturgy, the language of worship, the language of faith, the language of hope, the language of love. And it's that shared sacred language where we remember who we truly are and who we truly belong to, God and one another. So as we embrace this Pentecost season, we're being invited by the Spirit once again to reflect deeply and openly. Are we allowing our fears to push us toward forced uniformity? Because that's what's happening in the culture. That's Babel. Or are we courageously living in the Pentecost vision, which is the opposite of Babel and Babylon, which the book of Revelation warns against? We need to honor differences. We need to celebrate diversity. We need to experience the unity that's found in Christ alone. That's our call, to hold gently yet faithfully to the two languages, the everyday speech of kindness, care, and community, and the sacred language of worship that binds us together in Jesus. I pray that we will trust deeply in the Spirit who's always at work, turning our Babels into Pentecost moments, creating unity through love, grace, and genuine communion with the triune God and one another.